Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. I am your host, Marissa Tandon, and today we have one of my favorite people on the internet who is new to the podcast, so I will introduce her to you. This is Berklie. She is a content creator, a writer, a professional fangirl, and therefore a pretty good person to have on the show. We will be recapping Singapore, which has been a honestly very exciting race. Exciting not for the reasons we expected it to be, but exciting nonetheless. So let's jump into it, but before we do, please welcome Berklie novak-stolz to the podcast.
Hi.
Hello, how are you doing? How did you feel about the race?
Hopeful, terrified, a little disappointed, a little delusional. It's like I go through the entire spectrum of emotions whenever I'm watching. So I was feeling this morning. I was feeling.
Big feels. Well, since you're new to the show, usually the way we kick things off is I ask you kind of how you got into Formula One, what teams you support, what drivers you support, just so that everybody can get to know you.
So I got into Formula One. It was, honest to God, it was like a year ago on the 18th, this past September 18th, because that's when Singapore was last year. That was the first race I watched live, which, if you're a fan of Supernatural, as one may guess that I am, you know that September 18th is a very important date. And so I like to think that that happened for me. The Carlos Sainz win at Singapore, that happened for me. Because per your recommendation, I started watching DTS, and then I cleared 4 seasons in 2 days. And then I was like, oh my God, there's a race happening really soon. Maybe I should buy F1 TV and get in on that. And then I did, and now I'm here. So
my favorite part about that is that I do think Drive to Survive is perfect for the hyperfixation girlies, because you can, within maybe 2 weeks, be completely through and ready to watch the race. You can, we have a 3-week break right now before our next race. If you started right now and you are a fandom person, you could get through the entire show and catch up on this season before the next race. Okay, I already know the answer to this, and also your t-shirt sort of gives it away, but what teams and drivers do you support?
First and foremost, I am a Ferrari girly, and that's not even because both of the drivers are really hot. I mean, they are really hot, but also my great-grandmother immigrated from Modena in Italy, and that's where they do the Ferrari stuff. She grew up very, very close to Maranello, and so I think it was literally in my blood, in my DNA, for me to become a Ferrari fan. If I didn't, I was bringing dishonor on my homeland.
No, it's actually such a good point, because I feel like one of the things about American fans in Formula One is that European fans and fans from all over the world, we're seeing it with Franco Colapinto right now, having that home country patriotic kind of connection to the sport is similar to the way American sports we have, you follow the football team or the basketball team that's in your city, and we obviously don't have that same capacity. Technically, Haas is an American team, but it's there's not that same excitement. So I do wonder how many people have heritage that they then connect to their team, and Ferrari is obviously through and through an Italian team.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Because I remember once I got into Formula One, my grandfather's one of those men that I don't know how to talk to, because he's into he'll watch gambling videos on YouTube, just people playing the slots, or he'll watch how bridges are built, or on occasion I've seen him, once in a while he'll look at a sport or whatever, and he was watching some old NASCAR thing, and I said, "Hold up there, Stan," which I didn't call him Stan because, well, I respect him, but I was like, "Stan, do you happen to like racing?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay. Do you happen to like Formula One racing?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, "Oh my God, finally, I know how to talk this man. It only took 27 years, but I can ask my grandpa questions and know that he's not just humoring me." Grandpa, lovely man, but, how do we talk to our
that's
fathers?
actually really sweet.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
And then I got told about my great grandparents who were the immigrants, and talking about how Silvio and Alice just loved Ferrari F1, and that was so they immigrated in the 1930s and 40s. So I guess whenever Ferrari was getting, or F1 racing was really starting to take off, they supported Ferrari so hard from ocean away.
That's so sweet. I love that. I love that you have like I think actually it's the first time that we've had someone say like, "Oh, it's because of my family and my upbringing and everything like that." So it's actually kind of sweet. I like that. And it's also kind of cool because you just found it like so late in life, but now you have a, like a long-term connection background. I love the
Mhm.
idea that like Ferrari's in your blood. And speaking of, this was actually an interesting week for Ferrari. So we can go ahead and jump into this race, everything coming in. A couple of things I want to say to set the scene. This time last year, we were in Singapore and Carlos was our last race winner here. It was also the only race that Red Bull did not win last year. And the other kind of big stat going into this race is that there was a 100% occurrence of a safety car in Singapore. And so this was the very first race where that did not happen at Singapore. And the last race, again, to set the scene from last year, was caused by George Russell binning it into the wall right at the last lap last year. So very different situation, but something that I thought was interesting that we got in the post-race show from Ruth Buscombe. She talked about the fact that the safety cars have been caused mostly by these four corners, which are the four corners that were changed last year in the Singapore kind of roadworks that they've done. And so we won't know for a few years statistically whether or not this is actually the reason why the safety cars were in those four corners. But now that they've been changed, we are also seeing that the safety car rate, obviously, we had a safety car last year, but that was literally the last lap. And we did not have a safety car or a flag this year. So it could potentially be that those four corners being removed have made a big difference. Heading in, were you feeling stressed? Were you worried for the situation? Were you hoping for a Carlos back-to-back win?
No, I was hoping in the points for both of the boys. Of course, I was like, again, maybe not the clown shoes. I got my jester hat over there, and I was like thinking about putting it on and seeing like, well, like one of them are gonna get podium. But after like after as staunchly as I am a Ferrari fan, more specifically like Charles Leclerc, like I imprinted on him. Like that was my mom, and I'm a little baby duckling. The like
I
number
went
two
straight Twilight when you said imprinting, so I got a very different view.
I mean, essentially the same, but I just wanted to opt for duckling because it sounds a little better and doesn't posit me as a baby. Um, really messed up baby. But second for me is McLaren, and I want the
Mhm.
record to show it's when they still sucked. So I'm not just gonna hop on over there and be like, well, now they're winning, bleh. Like just in case anybody tries to like point fingers. And so it was also like watching Oscar Piastri last year. It just, he gave me cute aggression. I thought he was so sweet. And so I didn't imprint on him as much as I was like, get under my wing, little baby chick, and I'll
Yeah.
protect you from the horrors if I can. And so it's kind of hard actually having two teams that you really, really like because who am I supposed to like really root for? If it's like, say that it's like McLaren 1, 2, and then a Ferrari 3, 4, or like vice versa, I get itchy because I want one of them to win, but I couldn't tell you who because I'll be sad
That's so fair.
when one of
Either
them
way.
does it.
You'll be sad or happy either way. I guess it depends on if you're a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of girl. I will also say going into this race, it is the one of the hardest race conditions of the year. And so I was really interested in listening to Charles Leclerc specifically talk about it at the end of the race. He spoke about the fact that like while you're in it, you can kind of block it out. But the second you're getting out of the car, it feels like you're going to faint and throw up. And I think we saw those conditions kind of take their toll this year.
Wasn't it Qatar last year? Well, I know like Logan Sargent, I feel like he retired because he was like, I am extremely ill. And then you saw all of these
Yeah.
reports of drivers after being like, I hospitalized, like that
Yeah,
dehydrated.
Qatar was too much. And this would be the race closest to Qatar that is like in terms of heat and in terms of being in there. We had George over the radio. We'll talk about George's radio messages when we get into the race, but he let everyone know that it felt like a bit of a sauna.
Mhm.
And that seemed to be the condition for everyone. And that's the other thing is like when you're in these cars, inside the cockpit is so much hotter than it is outside as well. So like even if you're thinking about any race that you go to, like when you go to Texas or like you'll be at Texas next month for that
Mhm.
race, like the conditions inside the car are significantly hotter. There's no air conditioning. And also you have all of the engine heat flying back up at you. So I think like when we consider the conditions and we also think about like the humidity and how intense it is in there, it's pretty impressive that they're able to get through. And I think a lot of times we talk about Formula One and people talk about it as like some people want to call Formula One not a sport, right? Because they say that it's not like physically taxing. You're driving a car, you're sitting down I disagree, obviously. But the other thing is these types of races are the types of races where we talk about how much of a performance athlete you have to be because of how much body weight you are losing in literally just sweat from a race like this, the conditions that you're in, the heat that you're in, the humidity that you're in, that you're fighting through. Keeping yourself like awake is a real situation. So I like to set the scene. This is a tough one if you're in the cockpit. So then we should talk about going into this race. It's a little bit of a sad thing to kick the episode off with, but going into this race, we know Daniel Ricciardo is probably going into his last race of his career. And I was pretty surprised because I would say, like, generally speaking, with these rumors, I don't take the rumors seriously, especially when they're things like replacing a driver mid-season or like someone getting kicked out of their seat or things like that. I tend not to take them super seriously, except I will say that the press conferences before the race, I started to feel like, oh God, like I think this is Daniel's last race, because we had Max say if it is his last race, he's had a great career that he should be proud of. And then we had Daniel say like, yeah, like the timeline in my contract, like this is the time decisions have to be made. I don't know how you stand where Danny Rick stands on your like list of drivers, but how did you feel going in? Did it feel like it was the end?
After, oh god, qualifying, I think all of these past days have been like a blur for me, but I'm pretty sure it was like after qualifying and seeing just like how defeated he was body language wise. I was like, oh, buddy. And similar to like when Logan Sargent crashed. Yeah, watching him get out of the car
Mhm.
and the like dejectedness, which of course all drivers are going to be, a little bummed when that happens, but just seeing how heavy he looked, I was like, oh, baby.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Florida, I guess. We can be closer now. I will say he does still have a slide in my F1 PowerPoint because I was like, James Vowles can't take this away from me. Like, always an F1 driver in my heart. And so he's still in there.
Yeah, I will say this season we've had some moves that are, I don't want to say not typical. Like drivers have been replaced mid-season before and it will happen again, and it's a situation that's never comfortable but always for some reason seems to be slightly necessary. This one did feel weird because it's not like VCarb is fighting for a championship. It's not like there is a situation there where we feel like, okay, things are really going to be a big deal here. The other thing that I wanted to point out as we're going into this race is the narrative that has changed for Daniel for his whole season. Because at the very beginning of the season, everything was fine. And then not only was everything fine, but when Checo started to really drop in the points, there was so much rumor of him being the one to replace Checo on Red Bull to actually get promoted. And it is a little jarring to be going into a race like this late in the season and go from believing that he might be replacing Checo mid-season, pretty early on in the season before summer break. And so it's a little shocking that we've moved from Daniel potentially being promoted mid-season to pretty much potentially being kicked out mid-season. And I do think that it sounds like it's a situation where there's something in Liam Lawson's contract that if they don't make a decision now, then they won't be able to retain him moving forward, and then that puts him in contention for the Audi seat and being able to move over there. And I don't think that Red Bull wants to lose Liam. I also think that, like, as much as I hate to say it, it's possible that Danny is kind of at the end of his usefulness as a driver, his career as a driver, and like his best days are a little bit behind him in a way that's unfortunate. But it does feel like a pretty jarring switch within the season to go from potentially kicking someone out of their Red Bull seat to now potentially getting kicked out of your own junior team seat. So it's a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah. I feel like not the rumor so much. It's just like they try really hard, I feel like, to make sure that there's this element of visual foreshadowing, right? Because
Mhm.
the commentators will say something about Danny Rick, and then bam, we're looking at Liam Lawson. Like, what?
Yeah,
Why would you? Like, are you trying to be Shakespeare? Because I mean,
it's good TV.
I guess, yeah, but or like I don't know, just anytime it's like they're talking about somebody else and then they cut to the competitor. I mean, I get it, like the girls are fighting, but I just wish they wouldn't be so heavy-handed with it sometime. Like, be a little more discreet.
That's fair. It is fair. What can you do?
I mean, it does make me chuckle each time, but I'm like, I know what you're doing.
We also had, like, going into this, race prior to actually getting to the race weekend, a couple of things that are a big deal are McLaren's mini DRS has officially been ruled illegal and has to be changed. I don't know how closely you were following that drama, but essentially, for anyone who was or wasn't, the most short and succinct version of this is that their rear wing had a sort of like a flexibility that allowed it to be partially open when they were not within a DRS zone. So that was allowing them to potentially get a little bit more of a kind of slipstream that you would essentially get from being able to open DRS. And so in doing that, they have basically built a situation where doesn't matter where they are on the track, whether they're in the DRS zone or not, they're able to sort of open that rear wing just a little bit. That is a real mouthful. And they were basically under fire from Red Bull. Red Bull challenged that this was not legal, and officially the FIA did say that it was illegal this weekend. So going in, they did have to change and remove the mini DRS that they were calling it, though that obviously didn't really affect the race.
Yeah,
So
no.
and also, we did have like a nice little sassy comment from Charles Leclerc about the when asked about the upgrades, he was like, "Well, we don't have a mini DRS." So it's like, oh, fighting words.
The girls are fighting. Like that presidential alert.
They are. But yeah, I do think it's funny. It was such a big deal that like everybody was so adamant that this was the thing that was making the car so fast, and obviously not.
No. It's just it's like, I don't know, Lando is a good driver once he like doesn't psych himself out. And Oscar, what I wouldn't give to see some like agitation to that man. Like I don't want him to like punch like holes in walls kind of mad, but I want him to raise
Mm.
his voice a little bit. I want you to be able to hear it that he's like, "Well, I'm miffed." Like I don't want him to be furious. I just want the man to be miffed and me to be able to tell.
That's fair. You know, I am curious. You mentioned that like Lando's a good driver when he calms down. To me, his like temperament this week was a very different temperament than we've been
Mhm.
seeing from him the last couple of weekends, and I think it showed in his drive.
Yeah, I think it's what I've noticed or what I've talked at people with because my husband will watch the races with me. God love him, but I'll be like spout like fact after fact after fact, and he's like, "That's nice, honey," and then he goes back to like half paying attention playing Tetris, which I do genuinely love that for him. But it's just like I'll be like, I feel like Lando gets so hard on himself that
Mhm.
it's like he's thinking so hard about it that he's making mistakes that he wouldn't have usually made because he's thinking so hard about not making mistakes. It's like one of those like the harder I think about something, the more I suck at it. And the more I
Yeah.
feel like desperate and dejected from it. And I'm like, why was I here in the first place, And it's like, if I take half a Xanax and then like reevaluate, I'm good to go. But I don't know if he took half a Xanax or whatever, but that's like what if he has a prescription, good at him. I have a prescription, so good on me, but that's typically what helps sometimes.
Yeah, I will say it was just like I don't know if he like talked to someone, if there was a conversation with McLaren where everybody's sort of like back on the same page. I think the radio messages this weekend were much different. Everything felt a little bit more just kind of buttoned up, and it felt like Lando came with a confidence that he doesn't typically have. And I'm honestly, as someone who's been like on this show, we have been a little hard on him the last couple of weekends because it's been hard to watch him not put it in the way that like he could. And I continue to say that I think the thing that's missing from him in terms of winning a championship is the mentality of being able to win one. And it feels like this weekend he has allowed himself to shift a little bit more into that. Because I always feel like every weekend we hear him just sort of get really self deprecating, get really frustrated. A lot of times he's defeated even just going into qualifying. This was something that he had, honestly, like even before this season's run, where it was every time they asked him like about going into a race, he was like, yeah, well, Max is in a Red Bull, so there's only so much we can do. Where like he had really settled into this space of like second place is the best I can do. And even that is kind of a big ask. And I think this weekend he really did sound like a different driver, which was nice to see.
Yeah, I feel like last year, obviously, but keep in mind that I came into the season last year at Singapore, and so I just
Mhm.
saw everything past that. But I feel like even like in the beginning, that was the beginning. What would it be? The first 7-ish, 6? I don't know. Max won like what 7 races this year, and then it's been a wash for him since. Like I say that as affectionately affectionately as I can, but I feel like all of the drivers coming in were like, "Oh, rats, not again." Like, it's gonna have to be we're just gonna have to be best of the rest because that man's is in a rocket ship, and then his rocket ship caught fire in Australia, and I was like, "Hello? Like, what's going on here? Is this gonna be like our Singapore of 2024?" I had to think about what year it was. But no, we've had so many more. And so I don't know. I guess like everybody who was not a part of Red Bull had that kind of same mentality of like being defeated before they started because, it's like I kind of do the same thing where, and it's like if I don't expect anything, I can't be disappointed. But then my therapist said that like wasn't a good mentality to have. And so I started trying and like not catastrophizing and believing that like the best thing could happen. Like I'm assuming best intent. I'm trying. And you know what? My life's been better since then. So, Lando Norris, if you're out there, start trying and then like watch what happens. If you don't if you don't always think worst thing ever is gonna happen, if you don't catastrophize, you'll be good. So like I don't catastrophize anymore and I can go to the grocery store. So
Yeah.
I think he can do it too.
It feels like he maybe did have a good session. Like, I think a couple of other guests that I've had on the show have consistently advocated for him to get a sports therapist, and I'm
Mhm.
assuming he has one in his team, and we just, don't hear him talk about it. But, like, I think, honestly, it really feels like in between the last 2 races, he sat down and put his mind in the right place. And quite frankly, last race he may have had himself in a good place mentally, and we just didn't really have a shot to see it because of his Q1 knockout. And I think that is something to like remember going into this race is that potentially Lando really had locked in. And I do think last week we hear McLaren come out and say, look, we are going to prioritize Lando. We are going to put him first. And if it's necessary, we will sacrifice Oscar's race in order to get Lando closer to winning this championship. And I think last week we saw so much of that shift that we've been asking for from McLaren. And then Lando gets knocked out in Q1 in a way that was it's arguable. You could say it was avoidable if they had banked in a lap earlier. You could say that it's like something you can't account for when it comes to a safety car, or when it comes to a yellow flag. And so I think like with him, it's possible that we could have seen this mentality last week too, had there not been a situation. And he really did have a great race last week.
Mhm.
And he did end up playing the team game and helping Oscar win that race. So I do think it's possible that we are just finally seeing him locked in, but he was locked in last week. And I do think a lot of that might be from McLaren finally getting it together and saying, okay, here is our priority. We're not messing around anymore. We are trying to win both championships, and the only way we can do it is if everyone's on board. Um, so I'm hopeful that after this week, watching it, it does seem like someone, whoever it was, walked into McLaren and was like, "Listen, we're getting it together. No more. We can't do this anymore." So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, I just have a mental image in my head of Zach Brown coming in with like a thick stack of like a folder, like in a manila envelope, and they reach like the conference room or whatever, and every single person is there. I don't know how big the conference room would have to be for that. Regardless, like each driver is sitting at the other head of the table, and Zach Brown walks in with this thick file, and he puts it down. He's like, "It's time for us to stop fucking around," and then it's become the fuck around and find out game. And well, folks are finding out.
Yeah. Honestly, I hope that they had some sort of like trust fall team building exercise and everyone really sat down and, did some mirroring exercises. Everyone feels good about where they are. Everyone picked a buddy for the rest of the season to check in with. Whatever it is, in the name of competition, I hope to see it continue.
Hmm.
Well, on the flip side, the person closest to Lando's championship win is Max, and Max had his own new enemy this week, which was the FIA.
I'm sorry, it's so
And
fucking funny.
the thing about Max is that I don't know, especially people who started with Drive to Survive. I think one of the things that you miss from Drive to Survive is how funny Max Verstappen is. And that is fine. That is not a dig at getting into. I watched all of Drive to Survive. I really think that it's a valid way to get into the sport and everything like that. What I am saying is that when people complain about what's missing in Drive to Survive, I don't think enough people are complaining about the lack of Max's true personality. Because that man, honestly, his sense of humor is one of the driest, funniest senses of humor in the world. And on top of that, I don't know how to put this in a way that's not going to sound like I'm being derogatory, but this is actually a compliment. And I want to be so clear about it. Max also has the pettiness of a high school girl. And I love it. I love to watch it. This was for anyone who wasn't following the pre-race. Like, I know a lot of people just tune in for the race. So if you weren't following this weekend what was going on, Max basically, actually, there's a couple of different things that happened this weekend. So we'll go from the beginning. The FIA has decided that the hill they'd like to stand on this weekend was, I wish drivers would curse less. Not really sure why, and also, the way it was delivered could have, perhaps been done differently. As the president of the FIA said, "We're not rappers," and stated that he wanted everyone to watch their language. I think Lewis Hamilton rightfully called out the fact that that statement was not, acceptable. It was
Mhm.
very clearly there was a racial element, as Lewis Hamilton said, and I think it was I think it was an outrageous statement to make in the first place. It's one thing to say that you want to clean up the language of drivers or that you don't want like drivers to use foul language over the broadcast. That's one thing. I do want to point out though that that F1 TV does have an entirely separate broadcast for kids. So it's not as though there's like a really big issue about this. There is a separate broadcast that is like handled to make sure there's not foul language on the radio. This is a sport where drivers are driving 200 miles an hour in a car that could kill them. Every once in a while, they're going to say something that you might need to censor. And I just think that that's the case. And that being said, after that statement was made, Max in a press conference was asked, about about his car. He said, "Well, going into the weekend, we knew the car was fucked." To which the FIA handed down a penalty, but it was not a race penalty or a fine. They have demanded that he does community service.
What community? Serving whost.
Which I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, my stance on it, it's hard for me to feel okay, it's a regulatory body, right? Every sport has these random things where they decide like there's a dress code for the NBA or there's a dress code for the NHL or there's going to be penalties for fighting or these different things. Like a sport, I think a regulatory body has the ability to say what they want to have done. Like they can make the rules, they can make up penalties. There are penalties for crossing the track. Generally speaking, there's a real reason for having a penalty, there's a real reason for having
Mhm.
a fine. And foul language, ultimately, if you decide as a sport that you don't want foul language to be on your broadcast, maybe there's an issue in terms of like what you want said, right? You have the right to say that you don't want that to happen, and you also have the right technically to enact penalties for that. But I think there's something so weird about enacting a community service penalty. I think there's something about it's, like if you're going to fine your athletes, that's, usually there's a set fine, there's a reason for it.
Mhm.
And there are situations where things like do get out of hand. Like something that did come to mind was like Draymond Green in the NBA last year was given like an indefinite suspension basically for his technical fouls and the way he was behaving on court, and they basically were like you have to go to therapy and be cleared to play again was their requirement. And so there are situations where things go past like a financial fine or a game suspension or things like that.
Mhm.
But community service, as you said, serving who? What community?
God, and wasn't it earlier this season too that Yuki Tsunoda got like a really big slap on the wrist for using an epithet and him just like not realizing it because it like English wasn't his first language. And he was like, terribly apologetic and like
Mhm.
arguably it was a far worse word that he said than what Max Verstappen said.
Yeah.
But I don't I don't know, like if we're gonna get upset of him saying the car's fucked or whatever, and we're gonna let if my mom had balls, she'd be my dad's slide, which that's the name of my F1 group chat, by the way, because on iconic. And when my mom had surgery a couple of weeks ago and I had to go pick her up, she was like, if I had balls, I'd be your dad. And I was like, so true. But it doesn't make, out of all the people who, deserve penalties for various things, I simply do not think that Max using the F word is like, are they going to have him out in like a neon yellow vest, like walking up and down the side of the road with like a pokey thing and just picking up leaves and like later like other like garbage and putting it in a little plastic sack? Like,
Right. No, that's my favorite thing. I'm like, honestly, like, if anybody's doing court mandated community service, are they about to see Max Verstappen as well? And also, I do want to know, like, is it Singapore? Does he have to do community service in Singapore? Does he have to do community service in the Netherlands? Does he have to do community service in Austria, where Red Bull's based? Like, which one is it? Which community? It's a weird thing.
like when I go to do like a coat check at Austin, is he going to be like, and here you go? I'd be like, two-time world champ Max Verstappen. Sorry, it's a
Yeah, can you
Ferrari jacket,
imagine?
buddy.
Honestly, like, I do hope that that's what it is. I hope that their determination is that Max must take tickets at the Austin Grand Prix. You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about? Like, I just don't understand. He's going to sit out of free practice 1 and serve as a marshal. Like, what are the options here? And so then that does bring us to his post qualifying press conference where he refused. Well, let's say this. He didn't refuse to answer as he said. He was answering just short, and there was something wrong with his voice. That's why he couldn't talk. Honestly, I think his answers consisted of no, lots, we'll see. Max Verstappen's greatest hits. So that was
Yeah,
that.
and then didn't he go outside and then he was like, yeah, I'll answer questions outside of the conference room, and he's like being mobbed by reporters?
Yeah, actually maybe one of my favorite moves. He was asked from the back of the room if he would talk to reporters outside of the FIA press conference room, to which he leaned back on the couch and gave a giant thumbs up. And then directly outside of the press conference did in fact hold his own press conference where he actually answered questions. And I think sometimes these are the moments that I do want to point out about Max, because I really think he gets this reputation of being so difficult. And to be fair, he was back in the day. He has
Mm-hmm.
matured quite a bit. And I think a lot of times it's just like when you look at it, these are the things where I'm like, okay, he does still, like, he could have very easily not answered anybody's questions, gone home, done whatever. He did hold his own little press conference outside. He gave the reporters what they needed to write their articles. He answered their
Mm-hmm.
questions. He did everything he needed to. He just was very clear that he wasn't going to do it in the press conference room, and he intends not to do that. And I do wonder how long this standoff will be. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that this is not the first time that the FIA has gotten into hot water and in a direct fight with one big driver over some random thing that they've suddenly decided that they wanted to make a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say our last standoff was with Lewis during the jewelry ban that they wanted to have. So the FIA basically wanted drivers not to be able to wear jewelry inside the car at all. And Lewis wears a nose ring and earrings and has his entire career, and basically was like, I can't take them off. That's how piercings work. And the FIA was pretty adamant that they were going to like not allow drivers to race with jewelry in. And so they were going back and forth pretty publicly. And at one point, Lewis showed up to a press conference wearing 3 watches, 10 rings, and I think 6 necklaces. So Lewis is the last one who had this like big public situation. Ultimately, my favorite statement, similarly to Max, where he was like, there's something wrong with my voice. They asked Lewis what he was going to do if they did say that he couldn't drive, and he said, luckily we have another driver who can fill in. Obviously knowing that he's a big ticket, draw, and that would be a big situation. So he did win that war. And the one before that is actually Sebastian Vettel. There was a period of time where the FIA was demanding that they needed to check the driver's underwear to make sure that they were wearing the correct underwear, like safety regulation underwear. So they were literally doing underwear checks on grown men. And Sebastian Vettel in protest showed up with his underwear on the outside of his race suit, just
Oh,
to
so
prove
that's
a
what
point.
that picture I've seen is. Got it. I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't question it because I was like, yeah, that just seems like the kind of thing that he would do. Like, he's just being silly, being a little
Yeah.
goofy.
No.
It's like
I mean,
performance
being a
art.
little goofy, but in the name of protest. Yes, exactly. But yeah, I think it's one of those situations where it's like, I think I've seen a couple people speculate like, "Oh, is it about money? Are sponsors like less interested in working with drivers?" And quite honestly, with the last couple of things that have happened, this is like a historical pattern for the FIA, and I really do think it's about control and about like throwing things around. And what's interesting to me is that they continue to do this with drivers who have such a hard like have such a high profile that they can't really do anything about it. Sebastian Vettel wearing his underwear on the outside of his race suit is hilarious to us now, but nobody was going to like they couldn't suspend Sebastian Vettel and expect people to still watch the race. They're
Yeah.
not going to suspend Lewis Hamilton for wearing a nose ring, and they're not going to suspend Max Verstappen for saying fuck in a press conference. So at this point, I really don't know what their goal is.
To become even more hated.
Well, you know what? Speaking of, we should probably dive into the actual race itself. Heading into qualifying, I would say that we had a couple of big moves. Mercedes, we saw Lewis take third and Russell take fourth with a surprising move into their qualifying pace, which
Mhm.
obviously did not necessarily hold up in the race itself. And then I was surprised to see Oscar down in fifth. Honestly, I expected
Mhm.
him to be a little bit right behind Lando as he's been, but he did seem to struggle a little bit more this weekend than Lando did. And then of course our boy Carlos puts it in the wall during Q3. Um, and in that, unfortunately, Charles' best time was deleted as well, so that put our Ferraris in 9 and 10.
Yeah, I was like, why? What did I do? Because I feel like this was like a targeted attack at me specifically. Like, what? Why? Why? I'm just a girl.
It's the problem with being a Ferrari fan,
I know.
unfortunately.
Everybody's like, you picked this team because the boys are hot. No, because I like suffering. Actually, I like
Yeah.
getting my hopes up and then watching a little Monegasque man stomp all over him in his little red shoes. Man, 3 apples tall, tap dancing on my hopes and dreams.
Very true. Very true.
Still love him though.
Well, heading into the race, I am excited because I think we can finally put Lando no wins Norris to bed and maybe even tentatively give him a little bit of a Lando good start Norris, because that was actually a great start. It's the first time he's gotten away on pole the way that he did. And quite literally, he had already dropped Max out of DRS by lap 3.
Like that, the people's princess. I like it shows, but also this is Highlander. Like he's the people's princess.
I like to call him the people's baby girl. I think he lacks the royalty behavior of of where of Charles having people's princess, but he's got people's baby girl down on lock, I think.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's just like a lot of times I'll film like me reacting to different like segments of the race, like the start pretty much. Just
Mhm.
like especially it depends on who's on pole. And so I was like, all right, let's and Lando Norris, I'm so sorry. I didn't have faith in you. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I was like also whenever they were dropping those stats yesterday, they were being foul. Like absolutely diabolical in the like Lando has like 5 starts or whatever, but has yet to manage to lead on the first lap. Or like Max Verstappen is now in a 7 like Grand Prix like lit losing streak, or them talking about Colapinto and Logan Sargent. And like, look, I'm not gonna act like Logan Sargent was that great, but as an American and as a Southerner, I have a duty to swear some sort of allegiance to him. Plus, I think the way he got yanked out was unfair, and I really want to hate Franco, but I can't. I can't.
Yeah, I think the thing with them is like it was the right move, but it does suck. That's
Mhm.
ultimately the hardest part about it. It's like, what can you do about it at this point? But yeah, honestly, I will say I really think that watching the start this weekend, I was really surprised by the race this morning, because I do think I also have really lost faith in Lando's starts. I'm not going to say that I've lost faith in Lando. I think I have been very critical of him, but I have been critical of him in the fact that I really think that if he locks in, he could be a champion.
Mhm.
and I want to see him do that. I want to see him kind of elevate himself. And also, like, not to go back to the pre-race conference, but from the qualifying, when you look at the people that he's standing next to, one of the questions in the qualifying post conference was like, with 10 world championships directly behind you, like, how do you focus on the start? Meaning, like, Max, you've got Max in second and Lewis in third on the start of the race. And Lewis is a 7-time world champion. Max is a 3-time world champion. How much more nerve-wracking can a start get? And to actually see him lock in and successfully defend against both of them, get away, and really just start to run from there, at that point, I was like, "Okay, this is a different, like, we're having another step forward. We're having another evolution." And, also, I do wanna point out, like, the commentators made a good point on F1 TV, which was that this was also this season is his maiden win. He's gotten not only from being Lando no wins in taking his first win in Miami, which is not even the beginning of this season. It's actually a pretty good chunk of the way through. In Miami, he has his first win ever, and now we are talking about him potentially taking a championship away from Max, which is a quite impressive shift.
Oh, absolutely. I will admit that maybe I was wrong, and just like based off of last season and the seasons of yesteryear, I just like didn't know how anybody, especially like once, like minus Australia, right? Once the season seemed to be going how it, was previously, I was like, all right, it's just Lando's, not Lando. I was like, it's just gonna be Max. I'm like, good for him and whatever. But then Lando comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, dare I have hope? Like, like, like courage, poor stupid heart of stone. Like, do I dare? And I don't know. Just watching like the turnaround on him and his demeanor, especially after what happened. Was it Budapest?
Yeah.
That, oh boy, that I still feel about. That's the best way I can describe it. Is I'm really glad that Oscar got another window because that one feels right.
Yes, it feels nice to have it back.
Hmm.
And I think we're in a good place with them. With the two of them, I think that they're in a better place, and I think also watching this race and watching certain points where it wasn't really necessary, but Oscar was willing to play a team game if it was
Hmm.
going to be like required. I think overall, they have sort of resolved that team dynamic, and maybe it really did require Oscar to get that second win in Baku last weekend, and for that to really be a clear celebration of Oscar, and for it not to be as messed up as Budapest was. And I
Hmm.
think they have finally balanced that out, and I do think a lot of that has to do with why Lando was able to get this start off. And I think also so much of Lando's problems have been mental, and I think a lot of that feels like this perception that his team is not behind him, and now that they have publicly made a declaration that they are, I think his driving has vastly improved these last 2 weeks. Not that obviously he was winning and we're looking at him in this, like, championship contender. I'm not saying that he's been driving terribly, but I do think there have been these weaknesses throughout the season that have been, if you were to tally them all up, the reasoning as to why it might be impossible for him to catch Max versus a situation where I think, all I'll say is I do wish he had been driving this way 3 to 4 races ago, because I think we
Yeah.
would be in a very different conversation.
Yeah, I think like I don't know if he's in therapy. I'm gonna choose to believe that he is because that's like the best scenario. Like I think Lando's in therapy, and then I think I could not have been like Andrea or Zach Brown, where they like was like, all right, fine, team group therapy. Like we're your parents were getting divorced or whatever. Maybe they're not getting divorced; they're threatening divorce, and you got to try and like figure out a way to family counseling. I went, it didn't go well, but like also my parents weren't Andrea Stella and Zach Brown. So, but
Sure.
like that's what it felt like. Is that like they'd all like had a little sesh of group counseling where they were like, all right, let's figure out a plan and like what works for everyone and like air your grievances and like let's talk about 3 things that you love about the person next to you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Therapy works. Therapy
It does,
works.
and I think it was a good move, and I think, unfortunately, on the flip side, if we look at that start, the opposing thing is happening in Mercedes. Lewis, they put him on softs with this kind of hope that he'll be able to overtake Max within the beginning of the race. I get the intention behind the strategy, which, like, okay, you put Lewis on softs, he has the best grip going off the starting line. hopefully he can get the pace, and in that first start he can get past Max and then try to hold. But I was a little surprised by the move because it felt like it gave him only, which ultimately did not pay off. The only option that he had to stay on podium was to get past Max in that start, which is a pretty big gamble in my opinion, versus putting him on mediums like everyone else. He would have had a longer first stint, and then he could have fought for that, for that podium towards the end.
Mhm.
And as opposed to basically just completely taking him out of contention unless he got off and had a perfect start. I was a little surprised by it. I do think, like, obviously it's a strategy. It just is a strategy that didn't pay off. So poor
Yeah,
guy.
oh god, I know. It's also hard. Like I said, like, having multiple people that you want to win is, like, it's great and it's not because, like, had, like, Lewis won, I would've been like, "Oh my god, yes, that's my baby girl," but I would like, but Charles and, like, Lando and everybody, it's just like, why I don't know how other people can only have, like, such, like, a staunch allegiance to one driver because I am also of
Mhm.
the I've always been like this about sports, but I'm like, "Oh, I just hope everybody has a good time." And so finding just, like, one person for me to be like, "I hope they annihilate the rest of the blah, blah, blah," it's so hard. Look
It
at these
is,
guys. They're
yeah.
little, they're 3 apples tall, and you tell me that you want me to, like, gladiator style, pick one and root for him? No. Have you looked at Oscar Piastri in the eyes?
He's so
Have you
little.
looked
What
at
a little
his
guy.
so little, the
Ah!
polite cat smile?
Speaking of little guys and lap 1, we do have to talk about Franco because that move at the top, this was, I always ask if people have questions, and this was one of the most requested questions, which was, how did we feel about this move that Franco pulls on Alex? And quite frankly, I know Alex was upset about it over the radio, and I get that Alex has had, honestly, kind of a stressful run of it with Logan getting kicked out and with the Carlos signing, and there's so much stress that I feel he hasn't shown. So I get being frustrated, but the move was clean and the move was good. And it's hard. I honestly think that Alex's reaction came from the fact that he just hasn't had to deal with having a teammate that can put up a fight against him. And all my love to Logan, but it's just a lot of times they weren't even starting close on the grid. And when you're looking at the fact that last week they both finished in the points, and now Alex is getting kind of, he called it a dive bomb, but I wouldn't have called it a dive bomb. I think it was a clean move.
I think it was racing.
Jumped straight up into the points. I was like, yeah, good move. Like, there's undeniably a great move.
Yeah, I am yeah, like I said, it's not like I was hoping that, Colapinto would not do well because that's,
Right.
like, mean.
Mhm.
And it's like as much as I love Logan Sargent, not so much for his driving, but by nature of him being a Florida man, having Colapinto come in, I don't know. I'm always like kind of flabbergasted when they like we saw this first with Ollie Behrman and Jeddah, yeah,
Mhm.
and him being so hard on himself, and he still like got in the points, and the same thing with Colapinto and Behrman again with last week's race question mark. It's all a blur. But for them both to
Mhm.
get points, I'm like,
Yeah.
why are these infants, these 18-year-olds, like so hard on themselves? Like, are they all trying to be Kimmy Antonelli, or like what's happening
I
there?
think that I think the thing with it is it's like, okay, with Formula 1, arguably there are more than 20 drivers in the world capable of driving in Formula 1, and there are only 20 slots available. So there are so many factors that go into actually making it into an F1 seat, and I think getting there as young as possible is something that I think we're seeing a bigger turn towards. There's a desire for, like, a younger driver and a driver that can have a longer career just by the fact that they are of a younger age, right?
Hmm.
So you've got Kimi Antonelli coming in at 18, and also objectively, you have Kimi Antonelli coming in at 18, but not being pushed into this season mid-season. Ollie, you have someone coming in when he came in to fill in for Carlos because of the appendicitis situation. You have Ollie coming in when he's still trying to prove himself and really believing that this might be his only shot to prove that he gets a seat. Even though, to be honest with you, if you look at the way that they had kind of set up Ollie's season, I think the intention was always for him to take a Haas seat coming next year. And I think that is shown by the fact that I think he had something like 7 free practice sessions on the schedule for himself for before the season started that had already been announced. And so I think they were really knew that they were already looking at Ollie to take a seat at Haas. And I think Ollie going into that race knew that he was being looked at seriously to get a seat next year. And had he failed, had he crashed a Ferrari and put it into the wall instead of finishing in the points, or even just finishing the race, a lot of times I think when Franco came in, I said, I think he just needs to finish every race without any damage. And like Williams will feel like this was a win. And so he's already so far beyond the bottom tier expectations of it. I think when you get the chance to drive in Formula 1 or you get the chance to show your like the potential that you have in a situation that doesn't always come around, being able to replace a driver mid-season is pretty rare. Being able to fill in for a driver like Carlos Sainz on a Ferrari is such a freak accident of literally him having an appendicitis. It's the best possible version of a rookie coming in. I think when you look at it, it's like you really only do have that one shot, and it really does matter for as much as possible. So for Franco, it's like the amount of pressure that he must be under is such a weird combination of things because you're coming in to replace Logan Sargent. You also come in with a ton of sponsorship money, so you're already at this place where you're bringing about $4.5 million to the team just for 9 races is apparently the number. Um, and that's a huge deal to a team like Williams. It may not seem like so much money in the grand scheme of things, but for Williams, it is a really big deal. And you're looking at the fact that he's coming in with this pressure of they just kicked a driver out for me to come in for 9 races. But there's also this lack of pressure in the fact that his seat is already promised to Carlos Sainz. So there's a little bit of freedom in the fact that he's not trying to prove that he's worth this Williams seat. And so when you look at it for Franco, I think he's looking at it and he's like, the best possible option is that I do such a great job that Audi and Sauber are basically willing to get rid of a driver that they are pretty like certain with. They know what he's able to offer and things like that, and take a risk on him, which would require a very large amount of impressive moves, which is the path that he's going down now.
Mhm.
Or his other option is I just have to do well enough for people to remember me when a seat opens up and to find a way to stay in that same space. So does he end up going the Liam Lawson route, the Mick Schumacher route, where essentially I'm right here, I'm good enough to do it, and the second something opens up, I want to be here. Jack Doohan, for example, that worked out for him. He's going to be in Alpine, but he's spent a number of years kind of playing commentator for F1 TV and being the reserve driver for Alpine. Um, and so I think that's where Franco's at, and he has a different balance than everyone else has had coming into Formula 1, but I also think that's a weird kind of combo of pressure, and I do wonder if that's why he's been able to perform to the level that he's been able to perform, because he can basically kind of split his mindset. I have to finish the race and not crash the car, and Williams will be happy. I might be able to get this seat in the Audi situation, and if I can do that, then that means that, like, I have to really just be a wonder kid, I have to do an amazing job. Or worst case scenario, I just have to do good enough that Williams wants to keep me on as a reserve driver, I can be around the team as much as possible, and as soon as something opens up, then everybody remembers how I was reliable. And I think reliable is the word that he's chasing after, and he's surpassing that for sure. But yeah, I think it's this weird balance. And I think watching him pull this kind of move today, I was like, I do think he is so much more of a mature driver than his age would perceive him to be. And
Mhm.
also, the other thing that is so surprising about it is in Formula 2, it's not like he was running in championship contention for his F2 season. It's
Mhm.
very much like this feels like it came out of nowhere.
Yeah, because same thing happened with Behrman, I think. Well, when he first did it, and then again, it's just, and I don't know. I genuinely don't know that, like, what the biggest difference between, like, F1 and F2 cars are. Like, I know that they make a completely different horsepower and that, like, the braking is different, but for one driver to, like, not do so well and I guess be considered the easier category, only to get up into the harder one, and then just do so much better.
Mhm.
I don't know how that kind of stuff works. It's impressive, but I am like a little kerfuffled, a little
One of
befuddled by it.
So one of the biggest differences between F2 and F1 cars is power steering. So
Hmm.
F2 cars do not have power steering and F1 cars do. That's also one of the biggest differences between IndyCar and Formula One. There are a lot of differences between IndyCar and Formula One before people start jumping in the comments to tell me how wrong I am, but power steering is one of a very large portions of that. And so having power steering in a Formula One car, I think does show a little bit as to why these F2 drivers are able to come in and have such control of the car, um, because the actual effort in steering is a little bit different. The power of the car is very different, obviously. And so it's one of those situations where a rookie could come in and just completely be like, oh my God, and crash the car. Um, but I also think racing in Formula 2 is quite different. There are more cars on the track, there are more cars in the field that you have to clear, and things can be a little bit more. What's the word I want to look for? Risky and aggressive, I guess, given that there are a lot more crashes in F2. There is a lot more of like this element of trying to prove yourself. Whereas in Formula One, you've gotten there, you've proven yourself, and now you're driving to, win as opposed to driving to it's sort of like when you do extracurriculars in high school and then you do extracurriculars in college and the goal is to like prove yourself to get the job that you want to get. So like you need to get straight A's in high school or Formula 3 and then that way you can get into college or Formula 2 and then once you get into Formula 2 or college you need to do as much as you possibly can so that you can make all the right connections and that you can like get to the place of like it's not what you know, it's who you know, and then one of those people can help you get a job. Once you get the job, you're there. So now it's like you're really just driving to the best of your abilities as opposed to this like promise of the next step. You've reached the highest step that there is other than like more money or a better team.
Hmm.
So I think with that, I think there's like this balance of these F2 drivers that are coming into the F1 race and they are coming in and they still have that mentality of like trying to get the job. And so with that, I think they're racing a little bit differently as well, than the Formula One drivers are because Formula One drivers are constantly racing to keep their seat as opposed to racing to get another seat. And I think that is like a kind of a different mental space when you're coming in from a sporting perspective.
I don't know. This is so much related to today's race in general, um, but the mention of like only 20 seats on the grid,
Mm.
that's there can be more, right? Like if I'm not mistaken, they can have up to is it 13 teams because like back in the 90s there used to be a butt ton of people out there. And I don't like I just know through like I've tried to figure out like exactly how and when and why it all dwindled down to the 10 that there are. Like I know a lot of
Mhm.
it was like people getting bought out or it's like a very expensive sport so they just couldn't maintain um a team anymore, but I don't know how long it's been just the 10 teams, 20 drivers because it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be that way.
it doesn't have to be that way, but F1 does not really seem interested in adding an additional team. Andretti had a pretty big bid that they were trying to move in and get an F1 team, and F1 has basically been like, nah, we don't want to. Um, so there is the possibility of adding more teams. They'd have to be approved of by F1 and the FIA, and Andretti is the last team to attempt to do that, and it's really been a situation that it doesn't seem like F1 is interested in it. I also think part of the question is like, what does that do to the point system? Does it have to be overhauled again? And all of that. And I don't know. I go back and forth on whether or not I'd like to see an 11th team on the grid. I think ultimately, like, it would be nice because there are so many drivers who aren't getting to drive. Like, we've been talking about Daniel Ricciardo, and we'll talk about Daniel Ricciardo more at the end of this episode. But there's also the Valtteri Bottas situation, and he's potentially going to lose his seat over this. Franco is obviously such a great rookie that is obviously ready to be driving in Formula One, and there's like not a place for him to do so. Um, and you have the same situation with Logan Sargent. Again, not saying that he was up to snuff, obviously, but you've had Oscar Piastri himself say that he felt like Logan did not get the opportunity to drive to the best of his potential. Um, there are so many talented drivers. There's also Liam Lawson. Like we could keep going. Mick Schumacher, Nick DeVries didn't get a second chance. There are so many drivers that are qualified to drive in Formula One. So having those two extra slots would be great. Um, But I also do wonder what it does to the competitiveness of the field, what it looks like when you have 2 more drivers and the potential for more possible incidents racing-wise. Do we need to change the way the points are done so that there are more cars that get points, or do we have a full, um basically, we would be adding 2 more cars to the grid, so you'd have 12 cars that don't have points in the end of the race rather than 10. What does that do to the Constructors' Championship? How does the spread go out? Does it make it more competitive? Does it make it less competitive? There are so many different possibilities that come in just by adding 2 more cars to the grid, let alone up to, a couple more, teams on the grid. The short answer is the FIA could absolutely add a second team, and that there are people who are interested in funding that team. And Andretti was bringing in Cadillac as an additional power unit supplier, which would have also made things a little bit more competitive and interesting. But all of that being said, they're very clearly not interested in it, so it doesn't matter how I feel. I don't get to be in
It's
charge.
the FIA just doesn't want girls to have fun. And if they did, if they're not going to allow an extra team on the grid, they should do Formula 1.5, which is where we get girls like, I've got to stop calling everybody girls. Oh my God. Okay. Where we get drivers like Logan Sargent or Nick DeVries or, Mick Schumacher, like the people who have obviously proved that they have the mettle that it
Mhm.
takes, that they're just not like, I think part of too with like Logan, what was so difficult is that he was compared to Oscar Piastri for like, because it was both their rookie seasons, and
Yeah.
Oscar Piastri, Mr. Polite Cat, he was like, okay, and like, I'm just here and I'm going to do my thing and I'm going
Mhm.
to talk to you in a very gentle, soothing voice as I do it. The day I see that man excited is the day that I can happily die. That's all it'll take. Bury me then.
Yeah, I think what's hard is it's like there's this balance, right? So like the IndyCar field, for example, is much more crowded than Formula One is. There are many more seats. There are also races that you can enter just one time. Like there's not this same level of you have to be here through the whole season and all these different things. Like Catherine Legg, for example, has been able to enter starting at the Indy 500 and then continued to come back for a number of oval races, and that was super exciting, and it's cool to be able to see her driving. But it also means that sort of championship points are all over the place because people are able to kind of grab points later in the season or to participate in a short number of races. And so it makes the competition a little bit different. Obviously, you're not going to come in at the end of the season and win the championship, so you're going to be able to pull points where you can pull points and things like that. And the people who are in the season full time are going to be really your championship contenders. So it doesn't change
Mhm.
that. And with Formula One, we're not talking about bringing people in and letting them race one race and then never come back again. So there is a little bit of a different situation there. But I think it's hard because the question is, if you add more teams, if you add more slots, does Formula One, and this is not necessarily me saying this, is just like a thought exercise, but yeah, I think that the question becomes, if you, and what I think maybe the perception is by F1 and their desire not to add an extra team is, if you add more teams, do you become less this considered pinnacle of motorsport because, okay, now there's two more, is it less exclusive, is it, not the right fit? And it's hard to say what the right answer is because I think there is so much talent that doesn't get into F1 because there are only 20 seats. And a lot of times it means that like other factors outside of talent are bigger deals, like money, sponsorships, um, connections, those types of things, legacy. So, do we see more drivers that are perhaps heavier on the qualified and less on the connections and financial side moving into the sport if we have two extra seats, if we widen that field a little bit? Because at the same time, when you look at it and you say, okay, like money, connections, family name, Mick Schumacher still doesn't have a seat.
Mhm.
And that's sort of like the definition of money, connections, and family name. And he's not an untalented driver. So I think, I don't know. I don't know. Do you have a feeling? Do you want the extra team?
I don't know if it's like necessarily that I like want one. I just think that it would be really interesting. And I've watched a few documentaries about F1 of days past, of days yonder, and like looking at like the time where like Ayrton Senna was racing and like Elaine
Mhm.
Prost and just all of those people, and knowing that they were fighting against like so many other people, I think like just makes it a bit more interesting, and I think it adds validity to the wins.
Mm,
Because I was talking, or I don't know if we said it here or just when we were talking before this, like, I can actually appreciate Max more as a driver now than I could last year because it's, he would get pole and then, or sometimes Charles would, God love him, but it's like he'd start the race, like get the lead, and then we wouldn't see him again until he was crossing the line, getting that checkered flag. And it's like, of course, he has to have an unbelievable amount of skill as a driver if he can do that. But also, he's not having to like really race. Like, if
yeah.
there's no like overtaking or anything, if he just starts first and ends first and he's 30 seconds clear of the field, like, obviously, he has to be super great to do that. And the machinery underneath him is super great as well. But I feel like with these past few races where he hasn't had the spaceship advantage, I suppose I've appreciated him more as a driver because I can see how hard that he works and like how much skill he actually has that I didn't get to see when it was just Max race after race after race.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that, and I think, like, you can also kind of see as frustrated as he is about the car, you can also see that he's having a bit more fun this season and being able
Hmm.
to actually, like, drive and compete with people as opposed to having a race completely by himself, which unfortunately today's race doesn't necessarily fit that because it's the same thing of he was just driving by himself. It was just in second instead of first because Lando was
Hmm.
so far and away. But I do agree that I think like a closer field makes for better racing, makes for better drivers, and also shows a little bit more about like who these drivers really are. I think like also when you compare Lewis Hamilton's career and you look at like how hard he was fighting for his championships and who he was fighting against, and the fact that like you had him fighting against his teammate directly with Nico Rosberg and losing out a championship to Nico, but then also like beating Nico as well. So like there were periods of time where the two closest competitors were on the same team on Mercedes, and we've had that in different periods of time throughout Formula One history. And so I think like I personally prefer closer racing. I like not knowing who's going to win. I like having different winners, and I like watching that because I do think, like you're saying, it's a lot easier to like Max and be interested in what Max can do as a driver when he actually has to prove what he can do as a driver. And it's harder to understand the capacity of a driver. As you said, obviously the team has to be doing well. Obviously the car has to be great. And obviously he has to be able to control the car in a way that you can win these races by 30, 40 seconds. But it's harder to visualize and conceptualize that when you're not actually watching on track fighting or on track action. And some of my favorite Max performances are watching him be all the way in the back of the field and fight his way through. Um, and getting to the point where he can be all the way up there. And so watching him go through a little bit more of an adverse season this year has, I think, made it clear how good of a driver Max is. And it's nice to actually get to watch that as opposed to just watching him run away with it, because I also think it gives a little bit more validity to the fact that he is a great driver, and it gives a little bit more to people who are Max fans and that want to talk about how great Max is. It's a lot easier to talk about how great Max is when he can actually like also show that he can fight his way further, fight his
Hmm.
way to the top, deal with a car that's not driving properly. And so that's like it's been nice to watch. I think it's been pretty cool. And I think we're also running the risk of hitting a new sort of run away with it with the McLaren. So my hope is that obviously not this season because I think they've made a plan for it, but there's a potential where if the McLaren continues to develop in the way that it is and everyone else still struggles to keep up, you may get into a situation where we have a Nico Lewis with a Lando Oscar type of situation where the greatest competition on the field is two teammates.
Wow. But
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
I
not to
just
bring that kind
wish
of curse on anyone, but
I just wish everybody, I just want everybody to have a good time.
well, speaking of someone who had a good time, we should talk about Charles Leclerc's race because my gosh, P9 to P5 and honestly almost P4, I was really impressed. I will say Charles and his race engineer, Charles was tired of everyone this weekend. Like that man was like, not only please leave me alone, but like please, have you seen that TikTok where they're like, if you won't help us, at least stop bothering us? Like, I know that was the energy that Charles was bringing to his race engineer this weekend. Because when he fully said, the race engineer was like George P1, the fear in Charles' voice over the radio that he had, like, just driven through a wormhole. He was like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? P1?" Um, but other than that, I really think, like, watching him, I was frustrated actually because I thought both of the Ferraris had such great race pace, and had they been able to, uh, had Carlos not put it in the wall, had they been able to finish Q1 and actually get a little bit higher on the timesheet, I think we could have seen a very different race from the top. So,
Yeah, I know that Charles has a relatively new race engineer. I don't Was it, like, so bad, or I don't know what happened to warrant that, but was it so bad that he got replaced mid-season or before
yeah, I
mid-season?
I believe it was a weird situation where his race engineer was replaced, but it was never really explained why. And also when Charles was asked about it directly after, he didn't seem to know the reason why. So I don't know that it was like an issue between the two of them. It was just it seemed to be like a restructuring that's never really been explained. And I do think we're watching sort of like that mid-season battle of trying to get comfortable with the race engineer. Like, that is a relationship that, when we think about it, is one of the most core ones. And that when you have a new race engineer driver kind of relationship versus some of these drivers have been with their race engineers for almost their entire careers. You have Lewis and Bono, who basically like are brothers at this point, and you have the same with like Lando and his race engineer, quite close, Lando and Will, and Max and GP.
Yeah, God, I wish that I I think it was us that talked about this earlier about Lewis and Bono being like a bonded pair, and so they get to go
Yeah,
together, and
next year. I know.
like
I brought the sad out.
why are we leaving Bono in a farm in New Jersey, you know?
That's gonna be a weird vibe next year. But
Oh
also, I
god.
for you, did you feel like Charles was gonna catch George? Because I honestly did, and I was really surprised. And there were certain moments where, like, honestly, at like lap 53, George tapped the wall. I was like, oh god, here comes our safety car, here comes our crash, like into the wall, it's over. Another Ferrari takes another Mercedes out. Like, I was gonna be so stressed. But I was surprised he didn't catch him.
Yeah, cause that, like, last little bit, I mean, I was like, I've been lounging, and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm sitting up, right? Just picking away my little fingies, like, waiting and hoping and, like, rocking slowly back and forth, looking a little, diabolical, but, like, it helps.
Yeah.
Um, only for, like, nothing to, like, change, I guess? I don't know, the race this morning was, of course, exciting, but I was expecting a little bit more pizzazz
Yeah.
based on the everybody talking about the safety cars and, like, last year, which I did an in-depth analysis of last year, and, like, just the everything that happened for, the Carlos victory, mainly because it was a slide on my PowerPoint, but it felt like there were 2 retirements,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
there
it
was
seemed
it
to be
was Alex and Kevin Magnussen both retired, and those were both just technical issues. They didn't have anything to do with like on track action, really.
yes, I don't know, it wasn't boring by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't know, I think it would be fun if there was a little, push, a little shove, some
Yeah.
scuffles.
Little tap. Yeah, I think Singapore has such a reputation for being a chaotic race with crashes, safety cars, and those and red flags and those types of things. And this was quite truly a very clean race, especially for Singapore. I think this is also our eighth race in a row with no safety cars, or it might be our seventh. We had a virtual safety car in Baku, but like that wasn't a proper safety car. So I think we're really in a situation where it's like we've been racing pretty clean and pretty safe for a while. And I always worry it's like the way that like we talk about the big one in California, like the earthquake. It's like, okay, it's been so long. Like, how bad is the next crash going to be? Um, but yeah, I think it was I was surprised. I will say George, I do want to talk about George's radio since we've talked about this part where he basically almost, lost it. I get it. The last time George was here was a stressful situation,
And I
obviously.
laughed. I'm so sorry, King, but I was like, that was hilarious.
It was bad. I mean, and again, this is me saying he's improved obviously, but like last year, when he just it was nothing other than he lost control himself. He could not finish the race, and he threw it completely away, binned it right into the wall, and lost his podium. With that being said, um I could feel his regression of stress, like being back in the same place, because his radio messages at one point he literally just said, "I need some encouragement." It was like, okay. And I think they came back and they didn't even say, like, my favorite thing was like request, "I need some encouragement," was so confusing to the team that there was like a long pause and they came back and said something about like his tire temperature is looking good. And I was like, I think he meant like he wanted someone to tell him he was doing a good job.
Like, "You got it, buddy, and then after this, we're gonna go get ice cream."
Yes, I was like, "Oh boy," it's like a, like, "It's my first day of school, please tell me I did a good job," like, and that's, like, that's fine if you need that, but it was so funny because it was so many times that, like, at that point, I think a lot of my stress throughout the race was like, "Oh god, at what point is George gonna crash? Like, which lap will it be?" Because he just sounded so concerned about making it to the end, and he just sounded so distressed the entire race. And I was like, "I don't even think you're having a bad race to be distressed about." Like, I just feel like you are every time you drive past the corner that you crashed in, you're thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, I looked up some, inspirational quotes that could have been used. The first one says, "Progress, not perfection," which is what my therapist tells me frequently, so I don't think that that would have gone well for him. "Follow your plan, not your mood." That one could have been
Okay.
helpful.
Could have been
Um,
good, yeah.
"Choose to be optimistic. It feels better."
You know what? That I think they should have put on a t-shirt for George. But, like, not to be dramatic, but, like, with a photo of the crash from last year, I think he needed some exposure therapy, like, if he had just kind of thought about it a little bit more. I can't be but so mean to him because I do think, like, I was impressed that he not only didn't crash the car, but did manage to, like, hold Charles off this week, so I do think,
Mhm.
like, very clearly he improved on this track, but it was, like, every radio message that came through, I got a little bit more tense. I was like, at any moment, he's gonna crash. Okay, just to wrap us through the rest of the race, um, on the Mercedes side, the obviously the Lewis situation did not pay off. Putting him in the softs, they brought him in lap 18. To be honest, was surprised that he lasted a full 18 laps on the softs, but obviously later he thought that he could have stayed out longer and that he was sort of undercut by taking that strategy. I think with Lewis, he was just frustrated, and you could see how frustrated he was because I think it was nice for him to kind of qualify as high as he did yesterday, and then obviously it just completely fell apart and he lost it. And he's been really struggling with qualifying this year, as he's been really open about. So I think it was just that response of that, but it was frustrating to watch, and I think it was a gamble that didn't pay off. And then in terms of also other weird strategies, I thought Oscar's late pit stop was an interesting one. They basically at this point, so many people were trying to hold off for that possible safety car, which everyone felt was like a 100% chance of safety car. But it was as Ruth Buscombe said in the post show, it was not a 100% chance of a safety car. It's been a 100% occurrence, which is different.
Mhm.
Um, so in that being said, like they were holding off for this safety car possibility and bringing him in for a late pit stop, and I think they to some degree did get a little bit lucky that that didn't cause problems later on, though. Like they asked Oscar, and Oscar basically was like, "I would rather pit," and they kept him out anyway. And then I think ultimately he did benefit from having the fresh rubber, and luckily that it just worked out for him. But I think they could have struggled, but I think that was really the only big moment with McLaren where I felt like things were faltering versus previous races their strategy has been sort of all over the place and they've just been so fast that it didn't matter. So
Mhm.
I think with this, it was a gamble that they were holding off for the safety car. It makes sense as to why they would hold off for a safety car. I got a few questions about this when I asked people for questions, which also if you just a reminder that if you are following me on Instagram or if you're in the grid chat server, which you can join in the description of the episode, you can always ask me questions that we will cover in the race recap after the race. So that was one of the questions that we got a number of times was, did we feel like this McLaren late pit stop strategy was a bad move and they got lucky, or that it was a clear move? For me, I feel like waiting for a safety car in Singapore is not a bad move. It's almost guaranteed to happen. So holding off for one, everyone seemed to kind of take later pit stops than necessarily they would have at another track. And also, the late pit stop did allow Oscar to really just breeze right by both of the Mercedes and take that third podium position. Um, but I do see why people felt that way. I don't know for you if it felt like when Oscar was like, "Yeah, let me pit," and they wouldn't let him pit if you were distressed.
I was like, why won't they let this man cook? Like, what? Like, I don't know. Sometimes I like get the race engineers being like, you need to do this. And then the driver being like, well, you're not out here. So you can't tell me what to do. You're not my mom. And then, they like, or like, fine, just let me in now or like whatever. I don't, if it like, I feel like if a driver requests for something like hey, I would like to come in now because I have something wrong and like 3 or so miles to go before I have another
Mm,
chance to stop.
yeah.
And like, I'm glad that it worked out, but I don't know. If I was that driver, I'd be miffed. But then again, I cry on the interstate. So my opinion isn't really valued here.
That's fair. I think with Oscar, I think the issue was like for me, I think it wasn't necessary to ask him. Like the question of do you want to stop and then intending to not have him stop anyway was just a distraction that wasn't necessary because at that point Oscar wasn't radioing in as far as we know saying like I need to come in. He was, pushing as long as he could and waiting to be told for a pit stop. So I think in that scenario, you have the data. It feels like you can determine for yourself, as they did, that you can go longer and then just if Oscar brings it up, then deal with it. I think
Mm.
sometimes there are these moments where like they do seem to have these really McLaren does have really long radio messages where they're like trying to have a conversation as though their driver is just like stopping for coffee. And so that I do think is still a situation where for me as a professional race car driver, I feel like it would be very distracting. But I do think it seems to be the way that the team works. And I'm starting to wonder with McLaren if a lot of our things that we criticize are just maybe the way that they're working through things and that's sort of their strategy. And if you know that you're going to get a long-winded radio message, maybe you're ready for it. It doesn't bother you as much, but it just seems odd.
Yeah, I have a little rat brain or a little squirrel brain, depending on how you. It's not. It's just a weird way of saying that I have ADHD, and so if I were to be in the cockpit of a vehicle going like 175 miles an hour, and somebody was like, "Hey, Berklie, how are your tires feeling? Like, what do you think's going on?" I'd be like, "Stop! I'm already in tears. Like, you just gotta let me try." But like I said, I just get that way on the interstate in general, and I drive a 2009 Subaru Outback, right? And so I'm out there already fighting for my life on I-65. Just and so I cannot possibly like I will. If somebody calls me, I'll be like, I can't talk to you right now. I'm so sorry. I can barely listen to my music, and I'm just like white knuckle gripping it. So I don't know how these men do it. Stronger than I am. I
Agreed.
wish that they would come up with like a fun little shorthand, like what they did in Clockwork Orange. Like, just let
Yeah.
that happen. I think they should be already because everybody can hear the radio messages, right? It's not just like the driver to the
Yeah, so
engineer.
that's the thing about radio messages is like it's public, so every other team can hear it too. And so that's sometimes why you get these like plan A, plan Z, plan 100, which I think like there's a level of talking in code and then there's also a level of like confusing your driver. I think it's like a careful balance, but at the same time, ultimately it worked out for them. And I do think like it does feel like their strategy, they were looking for either a safety car or again having the tire degradation, a tire delta advantage, which is like if we talk about that is like how many less laps you've done on your tires, how much fresher your tires are than the people you're trying to pass.
Hmm.
So I think ultimately it worked out. I just think that they didn't necessarily need to involve Oscar in the decision to the way that they did.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm thinking about like I think every single team should invent a fun little language. That way they can like effectively not have to confuse their drivers with this like you know, strike team alpha plan 78.4, like, you know what we need you to do. Instead, they could just say a silly little word. Like, how it
Yeah, now
picks.
I'm imagining a team that's like doing all of their team radio in like Simlish, you know what I mean? Like and people are like, "Is that?" Yeah, it is. It is
Yeah, it is. And
Simlish.
you're jealous.
Oh man.
Oh my god, like,
Um,
looking at the etymology for the word box, if they just use the Greek word for box, nobody else is gonna know what they're talking about. Or if it's like I
so
sneeze
true.
once versus sneeze twice. I
Yeah.
just don't think they're getting creative enough out there.
Fair enough. Okay, I also think like as we look through the rest of the race, there were a couple of other things that happened down the field that maybe we weren't paying attention to as much. We did have team orders in the 40s for both Ferrari and for VCarb. So Ricardo switched with Yuki and Carlos swapped with Charles. Um, and I think that those team orders made sense. There was nothing kind of dramatic in them. They were trying to move through and fight for the points. Um, and then we also had two very big scares from Lando where I felt my entire body clench up and thought that he was potentially going to throw the race away for himself. Um, we had one earlier on before his pit stop where he did tap the wall and he said that he might have front wing damage. And we did hear a little bit of like criticism about the fact that McLaren didn't preemptively change the front wing when he went in for his pit stop. But ultimately, I think when you look at how he finished the race off and how fast he was going and how much he was putting in, I think obviously the damage on the front wing was so minimal that it just wasn't necessary for them to swap the front wing. Obviously, it was a risk because they hadn't fully gone through all of the data at that point because they basically had the tap, then he came in for the pit, and so they didn't have like a full couple of laps to see how it was affecting. Um, but ultimately, I think sometimes when we talk about like, oh, they should have done this, they should have done that, we forget how much data that the team has that we don't see. And they would have been able to tell if it was extreme damage or not. And at that point, he did not have so much of a gap to Max that it would have made sense for them to take the extra time. They could have done it, but I think it wasn't necessary and paid off. So again, who are we to say that like the data didn't say that they didn't need to swap the front wing?
Mhm.
That's that on that. And then we also have when we were getting close, he just lightly kissed the wall, and I was like, "Listen, the wall is not a suggestion. Neither are the boundaries. Stop it and finish the race."
Like, I know you got away with it last year, but maybe you won't this year. Maybe you'll be George this year instead of Carlos. You know what I'm saying?
Good lord. Did you see in the cooldown room where they watched that happen and Max was like, "Oh my god, you almost crashed. You know, like what were you doing?" It's like, "Yes, he did. It was very stressful."
It's like, I'm just a girl. I don't know what you want from me.
There's literally nothing I can do about that. That's how you felt. And very final thing that happened in the race, which is just like the last lap. Daniel Ricciardo did pit for a third time for fresh tires, and he did take fastest lap away from Lando in the end. Which there are a couple of things that I want to talk about when this comes into play, because it does raise a couple of questions about how Red Bull and VCarb work together, Daniel Ricciardo's legacy, and the championship battle. So with Daniel Ricciardo taking fastest lap away from Lando, that's one extra point that Lando did not get. And because of that one point, if Max were to finish second in everything, including the sprint races, even if Lando wins every race and takes fastest lap in every race, Max will still finish and win the drivers' championship because of this one point, which is so crazy. And so obviously that's a lot of ifs. Lando would have to win every race. Max would have to finish second in every race. That's including the 3 sprints that we have left. And Lando would still be taking fastest lap across the board. So at the peak number of points for both Max and Lando, assuming that Max never finishes ahead of Lando again, this one point is a championship deciding point that Daniel Ricciardo was able to take away. However, that is so many ifs, and it means that everything would be running completely 100% fine for that to be the case. However, obviously, a very big factor of a point. Um, I think let's talk about this in two factors before we talk about Daniel Ricciardo's legacy and the possibility of him leaving. Let's talk about what this actually means for the grid. The fact that Red Bull and VCarb both are underneath the Red Bull family, some people feel like, especially in moves like this, it means that Red Bull actually has 4 cars on the grid rather than 2. I am curious how you feel about that because essentially that would be saying that Red Bull is able to make calls for VCARB, which I don't know is necessarily the case. It also is not against the rules, technically speaking, for them to do what they're doing. And we have seen other teams pull things where they've helped other drivers out qualify other teams because it's better for their championship points. We've seen other drivers give drivers from other teams a tow in qualifying because it makes a big difference for their own competition with those teams. So not necessarily the same thing because they're not under the same family, but it is a situation where we have had other teams work with each other to the detriment of their competitors. And this is another situation where that's happening.
Right, which I feel like it's too close, I suppose, because like I know that they want us to call it VCARB, but it's Visa Cash App Red Bull, right?
Racing bulls, actually.
Racing Bulls? Okay, well, it's Red
Yeah.
Bull to me because that's all I associate it with. Like I Racing Bulls, that's a load of malarkey. Um I don't know. I just based on like the everything that I know about VCARB and
Mhm.
was it this year they had the name change?
Yes, this was the year they had the name change, but
Yes.
last year they were AlphaTauri.
Which was still very much like thought of as sister team to Red Bull.
Yeah. Mhm.
So are they not still sister team to Red Bull even under the
No,
VCARB moniker?
they are 100% the junior team to Red Bull, and I don't think that they've ever been quiet about that. Like I do think Red Bull is very open about the fact that previously AlphaTauri, now VCarb, that is their junior team. They do share a driver academy and all of these different things. But the one thing I would point out is that they're not the only team that has that as their situation. Haas is very much the junior team to Ferrari. You
Mhm.
look at the fact that Charles came in and then moved up. You also have the fact that Ollie Behrman, they share reserve drivers. Ollie's going into Haas, and eventually, in theory, he would move up to Ferrari should he be able to prove himself in that way. So you have that relationship. You have Williams and Mercedes are very much the same thing, where Williams is the junior team to Mercedes. You had George in Williams. There, George was in the Williams Driver Academy. He moved up into the Williams team, and then he was promoted into the Mercedes seat when they moved out Valtteri Bottas. So it's hard to say like that you don't have these other relationships where teams do work together and that they do kind of share resources and that they are under the same sort of brand and moniker. I just honestly would argue that I think Red Bull is just the most open about it. And I think the trouble there is that people look at it and they say that it feels like they have four cars on the grid and that they're able to do these kind of moves. But it's so rare that that's happening that that's like a really a big deal. And also, there have been times, and I think one of the reasons why Liam Lawson didn't necessarily get a seat earlier on is we talk about one of his most impressive things that he did when he was filling in for Daniel Ricciardo last year was that he knocked Max out of qualifying, and that's great if you're driving for a team that's not the junior team to Red Bull, like, you're knocking out like, it's not necessarily a great situation for them to have, and so I think they are very open about the fact that they have a junior team relationship, and I don't know that we can be so upset about it and say that no other team is doing the same thing. And so for me, like, one of the questions someone asked was, is allowing Red Bull to have four cars on the grid detrimental to the sport? And to me, I just don't think that it happens enough that it really is this situation that like they're all working together. Oftentimes, we actually do see them kind of cause problems. We've seen Yuki catch Max up in traffic before. Like there are periods of times where these drivers are working against each other, just by nature of the way that the sport works. And
Mhm.
there are other teams that also have junior teams that do the same thing and operate in the same way. They're just much quieter about it. And so I think with that, it's hard to say that like Red Bull is doing something that is cheating the sport. I think it just shows sometimes in moments like this where Daniel Ricciardo does pit and take the fastest lap, and that is a big help to Max. However, I also think Daniel Ricciardo taking the fastest lap wasn't necessarily just about Max's championship points. I think that it partially was, obviously, I'm sure it was part of their conversation and like a part of their strategy and looking at what they could do. And at that point, Daniel's race was completely over. He was running last. There was just no situation where it was gonna matter for him not to do like, for that pit stop to make a difference to his race. It's not like he sacrificed his race in order to help Max. It was something that was done in the end when they knew that there was no possibility that he was gonna be able to change anything about his own race. But I think also a lot of him pitting for that final fastest lap was the fact that it really does seem like this was his last race in Formula 1. And I think it was a level of sort of like a final send off, a nice thing for him to end on. And quite honestly, there was like this level of poeticism of like the fact that when you look at Daniel's career and you look at his sort of trajectory, the reason his career started to fall apart was because he left Red Bull because he didn't want to be the second driver to Max. So he wanted to go somewhere where he felt like he could be the first driver. He takes this job with Renault, which again, by the way, was buying that's another portion of something that we could get into about this idea of like teams working against each other or working with each other. Like you do have engine suppliers. Renault was buying their engines from Red Bull at the time. Like it was a very big dramatic situation. And so then you see that you see Daniel leave in quite a big flashy manner to go to Renault. Red Bull, Christian, Max, they all feel a little bit slighted and uncomfortable with the situation and feel like it was done in kind of a dramatic fashion. So you have Daniel leave Red Bull, he goes to Renault, he stays with Renault, but then makes kind of this situation where it feels like, oh, he's going to stay with Renault and build a legacy there. And then what does he do? He jumps ship and goes straight to McLaren, and things do not go well for him at McLaren. And ultimately, he's teammates with Lando. They have a good vibe and they do some fun social media, but Daniel just struggles in such a extreme capacity with the car, and in the end ends up getting ousted from that seat in a really public manner. And he really was kind of saying in press that there was no way that it was happening, that he had a contract, he was staying, he was committed to the team long term. And then ultimately he gets replaced with Oscar in like maybe one of the most dramatic situations in Formula 1 in recent mind. um if not close to, like, obviously we've had like the Ferrari and the Lewis situation and so many other things, but it was a very big, dramatic, wild situation for him to get dropped from McLaren. Then you have Red Bull basically give him a job as sort of like the team cheerleader and reserve driver. He's doing press, he's nowhere near driving. Things open up and they get him this seat at V Carb and he's back in the sport. Then he breaks his wrist directly after getting it back in. And then that gets Liam Lawson in, which ultimately is potentially the reason why he's losing his seat in the first place. And now you have Daniel back in the seat. He's possibly, most likely, in his very, very last race in Formula One after such an intense career. And there is something kind of poetic in him being able to take that one little chip at McLaren on his way out when he feels like that is probably the biggest reason why he doesn't have a career anymore, why it's over. That's a long version of saying that like I love a good narrative from time to time.
Yeah, no, everything is like storytelling, right? And this especially, I don't know. Most people aren't going to be like, "Well, you rich guys driving fast. That's not a story." Yeah, it is. And shut up. I know more than you, at least in terms of storytelling. We're getting up there for the
Yeah.
car stuff, but I don't. It's like once a week I'll send my friends a text and I'll be like, "When you guys going to get into Formula One?" It's not even because like I want to talk about it with you. I just you need to be experiencing this with me. Like you can not say a single word to me about it, but I just want to know that you're experiencing the epic highs and lows of high school football, and by that I mean Formula One racing.
Yeah,
It's just
I really no, I really feel that way. I think there's something to be said about so I guess my short version to my answer to this person's question is, do I feel like it's detrimental for Red Bull to have 4 cars on the grid? No. And I also think that other teams have the same capacity. They're just not as public about it. And I think with this specific moment, if this really was Daniel's last race in Formula 1, what a way to end the story. Because I also think like the story we were kind of all hoping for when it comes to storytelling was Daniel goes through all of those moves that I talked about. And what does he end up doing? He ends up going all the way back to Red Bull and becoming teammates with Max, and they win a constructors championship together. And it's beautiful. And Daniel learns to be the supporting driver and move on to the next portion of his career. And I think that's what we were all hoping for when he got back in last year. Um, and it's just not the narrative that we've been able to get. He just has not been driving to that same ability anymore. And so if that can't be the narrative that we get, if we can't get this world of him coming back to Red Bull in such a beautiful fashion and reuniting with Max, there's something nice about him being able to put one final kind of potential nail in the coffin to help Max out in that last possible way, when the fact that he didn't want to play second to Max is why things have started to fall apart and spiral for him. So I
Mhm.
do, from a storytelling perspective, I really think it was kind of beautiful. And also to have the radio at the end with them telling Max, your old friend Daniel took fastest lap, and he said thank you Daniel. Like, there's something kind of storytellingly poetic about it, brings a small tear to my eye about, I think sometimes when you look at, like, when you talk about storytelling, we talk about this thing like the fatal flaw, right? Which is like the character's problem that continues to cause them trauma, which is the reason why they continue to have a story. They need to keep having things going back and forth for them. And so this fatal flaw for characters exists because people have fatal flaws in real life. And I think with athletes, oftentimes you see that as well. And Daniel's fatal flaw was not wanting to believe that he wasn't the main character, right? And so for Daniel, I think you've watched him. I think his career and the story of his career would be completely different if he never left Red Bull, if he would have stayed and if he just would have accepted that he was the second driver to Max and to continued. I think they would have had a really beautiful kind of arc, right?
Mhm.
And because he wasn't able to do that, we've watched him just fail and fail and fail over and over again. And there's something about him ending on helping Max in a very specific and intense way, and potentially being like more of a helpful teammate to him than Checo has been this season in this one move by taking that 1 point berth away from Lando. There's something really poetic about that, about like the fatal flaw you had that ruined your career being the thing that you go out on, of accepting it, of willing to basically be like, not only did I come in last for my final race, but let me take fastest lap and help the guy that I feel like I threw my career away over, and like accepting that. There's something very beautiful about like a closed door on that.
Right,
That's
and
my feeling.
him being driver of the day, I'm not sure if that was so much of a people like, "Bye, buddy, hope you find your
Yeah.
dad," kinda thing, or if it was like his driving really was really did warrant it.
Yeah. I think it
Um,
was really more about the so long than the driving, but
okay, I still
yeah.
voted for Charles, but meh.
But yeah, I think if you watch the post race interviews, it feels like it's over. So
Yeah, because Logan had a very similar it was during a practice or qualifying, can't remember which, but he, like, sent it into the car, and as he was getting out, like, you could just see. He was like, "Okay, I'm
yeah,
done for.
yeah.
Bye."
Yeah, it's hard. And I think this one was like with Logan, it almost felt like there was like a dejected like anger almost. And I get it. Where it feels like he just never got his career like he never really got his like world off the landing pad, off the launch pad. That's the word I'm looking for. Versus Daniel, it feels like he's sort of accepting the inevitability. And I think it was hard. It was hard to watch. I think like also the F1 TV crew was kind of choked up. Will Buxton was kind of almost ready to cry after watching his interview. And I think it will be sad to say goodbye to Daniel. I think there's been so much of like a level of his career that when you look at it, he's given a lot to the sport. He's been kind of such a beloved fan favorite. Um, and I'll be sad to see him go, and I'm sad to see him go before Texas because that's really like one of his favorite races. He really shines in. He has so much fun there. Um, and I think it really is just a contract timing thing, is what it sounds like.
So would it be Liam Lawson that they put in the seat instead?
Yeah, it would be. So yeah, I think in Austin, it sounds pretty much like there is a clause in Liam's contract that things have to be resolved by this weekend, and it seems like in this month that we're about to head into between our races that we will most likely see no Daniel. Liam will replace, and I think this was our farewell to Daniel. As sad as that is, I do think that might have been our last race with Daniel Ricciardo. I'm sad to see him go. And that being said, we're at the end of the episode, end of the race recap. So, that being said, I always ask at the end of the episode, predictions for next race or any big predictions for the rest of the season.
Do they have to be, like, statistically based, or can I be, like,
No,
a
you can just be your feels. All vibes
okay,
is fair.
okay, all vibes. In a perfect world, and it's my world, we're just living in it, we're gonna have Charles, he's gonna win the race. Ferrari, they're gonna win the championship. Lewis Hamilton's gonna win several more races.
Yep.
So a mix between, because that's who I got up there. There's Carlos, and then there's Charles, and then that's Lewis's car. Because I'm getting ready to. I've already adopted him, but like to make sure that people can visually see that that's what I've done.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. I also I hope everybody has a good time.
Yeah, I would say for me, I think I my call right now, especially after this fastest lap, I think we are going to see Lando lose the world championship, but I think the points berth is going to be small enough that we are going to see a lot of people blame it on the Budapest situation, um, and the race points that we have given Oscar over Lando before they were willing to make a decision. It's unfortunate, but I do feel like that's where we're going to end up, and I think my last call is I think we're gonna see a surprise race winner that's not Max or Lando. I think there will be something where we see a race win come from not necessarily Oscar now that they've made choices of where they're planning, but I do think we might see a Mercedes driver pull something out or another Ferrari driver pull something out where we see a race that Lando really needed to win go to another team.
I am never going to wish ill on anyone. However, if Max could simply not win Austin in whatever capacity, second, great. As long as he doesn't win it, I will be happy because I am flying there. I'm going to be at turn 4, and if I have to do all the everything that comes from going to Alabama to Austin and he wins, I'm going to be a little miffed.
At least it will be a good race. I will say you're going into a race where I think Austin is going to be a great race. People have so much fun. Drivers love that track. And I will say last year, despite the double DSQ, we did see Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have one of the best races of the season that they had for themselves. And Lewis in particular had been having a pretty rough season up to that point. So we could see a cool upset next month. Actually, that's how long we have until our next race. But yeah, so I think that would be fun. I would love to see either of those drivers kind of sneak back into the podium and have a little bit of a redemption from last year. So that's my hope. It's my fingers crossed moment. Well, Berklie, this was so much fun. Thank you for joining me.
Of course.
If people would like to find you on the internet, what are your handles? Where could they find you?
I am Icarus Pendragon all over the internet. And so that is Instagram, that is Twitter, X, whatever you call it. I get on there sometimes. Tumblr, if you're in 2013 like I am, and then TikTok. So you can find me all of those places.
Thanks for hanging out. I'm so glad I got you onto Formula One and the brain rot that comes with it. And thanks for hanging out with me for a number of hours to talk about Singapore.
I'm so glad. My husband didn't really care that much. I was like, can we talk about it? And he's like, let me take my medicine first. Fake fan. Fake fan.
Yeah, so true. Well, I will always be here for you. And to all of you for listening, I will always be here for you too. I will see you in a full month for the race recap, but we'll have some episodes in between there to talk about some other fun stuff. Always, if you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.